Well, good morning. Happy New Year, since I wasn't here when that happened. It's good to be with you today. And we're going to be in John chapter 5, so you can start getting your way there. I wanted to thank everyone for praying for our family these past few weeks. We left on December 23rd and for India. And we're routed through Prague on the way there, and then on the way back through Helsinki. So it was a balmy 20 degrees in Prague, humid 20 degrees, and then it was a balmy 85 degrees in Chennai. And I think with the extra spice in breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it felt more like 95. And then on the way back in Helsinki, where you get like 6 hours of light a day this time of year, it was cold and snowy. So it was kind of a yo-yoing temperature trip, and then a yo-yoing of time zones as well. So we're still a little bit, I'm pretty sure you're there, but we're still adjusting to the sleep jet lag from all of that. But it's great to be back and for things to be steady and stable in all the ways and predictable, and yet it was a great trip, and we're very blessed we're able to go and come back and get through the things that we had planned in the way we had planned, and so that was wonderful, and we're grateful. One of the things that stood out to us about India that's relevant for us this morning is from 20 years ago to now, India has changed. At least the India that we saw 20 years ago has changed. So much so that when we're thinking of Boise and all the changes in Boise, we always complain there's too much, growing too fast. But it's not growing like that. There are whole buildings just gone, whole neighborhoods that were there that don't look anything like the way they looked when we were there just 20 years ago. That place, just explosive growth and changes in all the ways. And so that was a little disorienting to go back and to feel like neighborhoods and blocks that were one way were different. And that reminded me of how change is a constant in life, and some of it is not things that we want to change, but our God does have change that he intends in our life, doesn't he? And he wants us to change in some areas, and through Christ, he's initiated the opportunity for change, and he continues to bring change and to want change in our lives. And we see that in these crisp and clear instances where Jesus reaches out and touches people in situations that are desperate or difficult or hard. And he gives them an opportunity not just to have a physical change, but to have a spiritual change. And the bigger change is the spiritual one. The more needed change is the spiritual one. And yet, many of the people Jesus touches, we don't walk away knowing really what happens later in their lives spiritually. We get to see that there was a physical change. It's unclear whether there was a spiritual transformation or a full one. And so in the Gospel of John, as Pastor Jaron walked us through last week, believing is a big deal. In just the first 4 chapters, how many times it talked about, and they believed. That is the theme of the book, that you would believe and have confidence and security in believing in Jesus. But we're walking into some chapters now that are a little different in flavor. And there's going to be reasons to believe, and then there's also going to be the reasons people didn't believe. And we're going to see both coming up. So that's our kind of our theme this morning, is moving forward in faith. That's our opportunities to move forward, to move closer to Jesus, to move closer to what God wants in our life, or the other is possible, isn't it? So I'd like us to read the whole section, and then we'll kind of go through it verse by verse and see how we can do. This clock's really off. Huh. Okay, well, that's okay. I can adjust. I'll look at a different place. So, here, read with me here. So after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which is 5 roofed colonnades, and in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water stirred up. And while I'm going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed. He took up his bed and he walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" And they asked him, "Who's the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" And now the man who had been healed didn't know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, and there was a crowd in the place. So afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." And the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. Now, before we go through this kind of verse by verse, just want to say that this miracle is a little different than the miracles that have come before. The miracles that we've seen before, they're the signs as they're called in John, is a miracle like in Cana at a wedding, which was public, but it was public in a small kind of backward country town. And it's family and friends, and then that's a wider group than maybe we would do weddings, but this is not big picture public. So his miracles up to this point have been more obscure. This miracle is in Jerusalem. This miracle is in a very public venue, and it's on Sabbath. So, whole different setting. This is a very public event. That's an important thing for us to catch. And again, up to this time, we've mainly seen the reasons people believed in Jesus, kind of the proofs or the reasons they had for following him and trusting him. Now we're going to start seeing with this miracle reasons people didn't follow him. And I'm going to make the case, or it's my observation, that I think as we look at the cases where people reject Jesus and don't follow him, as we look at him, we're probably going to find that those actually build up reasons to follow him. They're not good reasons, in other words, but they are the reasons he was rejected by many. So that's coming up, and that's what we will see in the chapters coming ahead. And then the second is just that, the wedding was a large event, and this is public, more public than they've been. So now let's just walk through some of these, and really there's just kind of two emphases that we will get to, or two main applications I'm going to point out as we go through. So verse 1, it says there was a feast of the Jews. We're not told which feast of the Jews. We're just told that there's a feast of the Jews. This is the only time that a feast is mentioned in John that we don't know what it's about. And so it's just the reason he went to Jerusalem. And then it moves on in verse 2, and it says, there in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, a pool. This is the north side of Jerusalem, of the old town, of the temple, and it's Bethesda. Yes. That's a hard word to get out for me. And in this pool, there are 5 colonnades. And all we're supposed to, I think, capture here is just that this was not just public, but it was formal. Colonnades were, the big columns with a roof over them, kind of like a big, giant hallway. So in that day and age, that meant shade. It meant protection from elements. It's an official place, a well-known place, but who's gathered there? Let's kind of set the scene. It's people who are really sick. It's not like you got a cold sick. This is people who are blind, who are sick in ways they can't cure in any other way. They're physically invalids is what it says in many of the translations. In others, it just says they're sick. But there are serious problems that they're there for, and they're all gathered with hopes of going down. Now, if you have a King James version, you're going to notice something. I don't want to skip this, but if you look through, verses 1, 2, and 3 are there, and then it skips to verse 5 in most of the other translations. So as in verse 3, it says, "In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed." But then it skips. Why are we missing verse 4? Well, the reason we're missing verse 4 is this. Here's what it says in the King James. It says this: "In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered." And then you see the last little bolded part, so like 3b in King James is additional, "waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. And whoever first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatever disease he had." Here's the reality. The Bible we have and the English translations we have come off of old manuscripts. And so the manuscripts that are the oldest don't have 3b and 4 in them. Those are in the later manuscripts. And so as scholars have gone through and said, are they reliable or not, most of them come back to this section, 3b and 4, and say it's different language and it's saying something that's not consistent, and the oldest manuscripts don't have it, so we're going to scrub it. We're not going to put something in that we don't have the highest degree of confidence in. And so it's not in many of the translations for that reason. What they do think is that this was the popular view, is that these waters, instead of there being a spring that every so often spurted up water and made things move, there's an angel that came and caused it, and so they had supernatural powers to help you. And the thought was the first man down or woman down got the best blessing. I think that's an important emphasis here, just because it kind of puts the weight of the healing on the capacity of the person. So if I do it right, then I'm going to get healed. If I beat everybody else down, I get the blessing. This is 101 human reasoning about the way good things happen in life, and it's exactly the opposite of what the Bible teaches. The Bible does not teach that we can gain things by our effort, right? That if we do it good enough or right enough, it's going to work out. The Bible teaches God has to do it for us, right? It has to be His work first. And so this is an important thing here, because the man that wants to be healed clearly has this in view, that he needs to get down, but he's struggling to do it quick enough. That's the scene. Now we find in verse 5 that the guy's been in this situation, in this physical situation, for 38 years. See that? One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. That's a long time. We don't know how old he was when he started having his problems. We don't really know what his issue is. Could be like terrible arthritis. Could be some muscular thing that just left him weak enough. But he couldn't move himself very quickly or well enough on his own. And so in verse 6, it says, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Now, if that's you or me, would you maybe reply sarcastically back to him? No, I'm just standing here like waiting around for no reason at all. I mean, it'd be hard, maybe it would seem, but something about Jesus' tone or approach, since this guy doesn't know who he is, apparently caused him to give an honest, clear answer back. Maybe he was just desperate enough. And so the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me. I got to be first, but I can't get in first." We just spent like 2.5 weeks in lines at the airport, at the biggest castle in the world in Prague, all over in India where there's like 1 billion people, just packed in lines and everywhere. Waiting in line does not bring out the best in people. Right? You put people in a line and they're worried about missing out or they're going to close the thing and everybody starts getting very self-absorbed. There's pushing, there's cutting, it's not the best of humanity, is it? So you can sense that this scene, desperate people that don't have answers. They can't even schedule an appointment with somebody, right? They're there hoping that they can get down, and probably many of them have somebody to help them beat everybody else out. And this guy is there on his own, and he's waiting to get in, and he is missing out. We don't know how long. It doesn't seem like he's been there 38 years, but he's had his problem that long, and he's been waiting a long time to get in, and he's missing out in the queue order. The vibe at the pool is not real good. D.A. Carson describes this guy's intention, though, as the depth of his desire. I like the way he said it. And the depth of this guy's desire is enough that he's keeping at it. He's so desperate that he's not giving up either. He doesn't see another answer, so he's diligent. He's sticking to his plan. He just isn't working out for him. So that's the scene. Jesus' answer in verse 8 is kind of surprising. Most of the time when Jesus heals somebody, there's some type of dialogue, there's some kind of a hinting at deeper things or spiritual things, but in this situation, Jesus kind of skips over that, right? And he just gets right at it. He says, get up! Which, I mean, again, the guy could be like, dude, what do you think I'm here for? I mean, like, I've been wanting to get up for a long time. But Jesus says, get up, take up your bed, and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Did he need to get into the water? Did he need to beat everybody else? Did there need to be an angel doing things? Guess what? No. It didn't take any of those things for God to do what God wanted to do for him to be healed. You know, we do a lot of crazy things trying to get God to do what we want him to do. We think there's like these systems or that's complicated. Sometimes just like straight asking, right? Like, help, God. I don't think God's impressed by the more things we do or the more flowery our prayer, in other words, or even by the more people we get to pray. It's not bad to have lots of people praying, but that's not a manipulative tool for God. He chooses, he makes a decision, and he heals the guy. And as far as we can tell in this instance, he does not require the guy to have any faith. Now, sometimes it's clear he's asking for the trust in him, or he's asking him to do something. In this case, it doesn't seem to be what is required. He just simply says, get up. He cuts to the chase, and he heals the guy. And so this would be the first kind of application that I want to make, and that is this. What Jesus does is more important than what we do. As a general principle, this is true in our relationship with God. What he does is more important than what we do. That's how we come to him in the first place. I can't fix myself. I can't figure things out. I'm not enough. I need you. And so what he does is the more important part, and that guy is kind of learning that lesson in a very specific way here. Now, there's a whole sermon we could do just on this, or multiple sermons, because it is so easy for us to try to work on our problems or kind of include God on the side, but not depend on him. But, you know, Jesus did leave the example of the prayer of, give us our daily bread, right? Just the simple asking for God to work and provide. Seems here the man didn't even ask. Jesus just meets his need in a way that was beyond what he thought was possible. Notice as well what happens at the end. So verse 8, he says, get up. And what's the guy do? He gets up and picks up the bed, which is probably just a mat, right? It's not like it's heavy. But he just walks off. So this is a full, complete healing because he's strong enough to just get up and walk off. John, you've had some physical problems recently. Does it usually work that way? Usually, when you're fully down and out, there's a season of gaining strength. Got a bunch of people with knee surgeries and things, and there's a step-by-step process to get stronger and back to your full self. That's not the case here. He walks off, and so it's a full and complete repair. You got to wonder what that was like in that moment. You got an area of desperate people gathered around, and I'm thinking they're not paying attention to the person next to them so much as their eyes are kind of glued in the water. If you're there and you're that desperate, you're waiting for it to move, right? Because as soon as it moves, you need to get moving. You don't want to be taking a nap, so everybody's kind of watching you, probably, very focused. And all of a sudden there's a stir, kind of like when you throw a rock in a pond and the ripples go out. You hear a murmur, you hear something going on over there, and everybody, all of a sudden, their attention's away from the water to what's happening over here with this guy that just got healed and didn't need to go in. Now, I don't know if when they heard and found out what happened, if then they were all chasing Jesus around. I don't know how that worked. I just know that certainly was a unique moment and situation. That's all the setup for this event. Now, what we find is that after Jesus says this, the very end there, it says, now that day was the Sabbath. Boom, boom, boom. Right? That's a loaded statement. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you some homework today, that this is the issue that's going to keep coming up. In fact, this Sabbath tension, it's embedded in a bunch of the problems and reasons people do not choose to believe in Jesus because of Jesus' response to the Sabbath. And so I'll just phrase it this way. Maybe not. There we go. Jesus' unorthodox approach to Sabbath day caused many to dismiss and reject him. His unorthodox approach caused many to dismiss and reject him. We're going to have to spend some time on this, but I'm just going to do a little bit today, and then we'll come back to it. In Nehemiah, it's one of the places in the Old Testament where you see them calling out an inappropriate response to the Sabbath day. God had told the Jewish people, told Israel, here's what you do. Here's my plan for you. Organize your lives this way. So listen to Nehemiah reprimand the nation. He says, in those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day when they sold the food, Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath. So he's saying foreigners, outsiders, to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. Then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil thing you're doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. If you remember the story, Nehemiah is there rebuilding the city because they've all been deported because they didn't obey God. They've gotten a chance to return, a remnant, and he's saying, you're right away doing the same thing you were doing before. Are you guys dumb? Now stop it. Here's the reality. The Sabbath in the Old Testament, if we were to sum it up, was a tool of good by God. His plan was that it was a great thing for you because it was one day of the week when you weren't supposed to have to work for a living. One day a week when he said, stop working so you can relax, eat a meal, and enjoy me. There aren't these other things going on. It was supposed to be for their good. But as pastors and religious leaders are prone to do, we want to figure the details out and know exactly what every word means. And so by the time of Jesus, there were at least 38 categories of work. They had delineated that concept and idea, breaking it into at least 38 areas of life that you could define as work, and then detailing it out so that it's like, okay, I can't do that, but I can walk this far, but if I go farther than that, it's breaking the law. And so it was all embedded into craziness. You got like a manual for a one day of the week, what you can and can't do. And instead of it being a good day, I think it kind of probably made it somewhat a miserable day, right? And Jesus was poking at that. He's going to poke at it over and over again, and he's not going to stop because he's going to say, God designed the Sabbath day for good. Am I not supposed to do good on the Sabbath day? And over again, he's going to choose to heal on that day when he could have chose to heal on a different day. So it's not like this is accidental. He also chooses to do that in public settings when there are religious leaders who are going to see and hear about it and know about it. So it's not like Jesus is innocent here. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's going to keep doing it. And it's going to cause conflict, and it's going to be the reason a lot of people reject him. Doesn't seem funny to us today looking, that seems crazy. But in that day, they had a question, well, he's not doing what all the other religious leaders are saying. He's pushing. And so many didn't trust him because of that. He doesn't back up or back off. Here's your homework. You can either just screenshot that or ask me later, or you can not do it. But here are some of the other instances where it's very clear that Jesus did a miracle on the Sabbath, and then you can read the responses. Because the responses to his miracles by the religious leaders are all bad. None of them are good. They don't like it. And so those are the clearest examples of Sabbath healing that Jesus did, poking his finger into their business, which really is an issue of authority, isn't it? We say this, Jesus is saying this. Who gets to make that call? And Jesus is stepping into their lane, and it causes problems for them. Okay, let's move into these last verses. So, verse 11, but Jesus answered them, or the man that had been healed answered them. I'm wrong in the who's who here. But he answered them, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. So what's the guy do? When the religious leaders come to him and say, where'd this come? He's like, you know what? That guy is a great guy. He healed me. You don't need to know that. No, he says, kind of like Adam did with his wife. It's like, the woman you gave me. Right? It's like, well, the guy that healed me, he's just the one that told me. He just wants out of the spotlight, correct? Now, maybe we don't know his intent, but this is stacking up bad for him. I'm just going to tell you that at the end of this guy doesn't look the best. So they ask him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Now, the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, and there was a crowd in the place. Now, it's possible that Jesus healed him, told him to get up, and then just disappeared. But it's probable that the guy didn't ask either, right? That he's so preoccupied with himself that he's just more excited about being healed than the person who healed him. And I'd like to pause there and just say, one of the great dangers we have, one of the great dangers in the Bible, is that we'll focus on the external or the physical and say, sweet, my circumstances changed. And we don't realize that our God who intervened on our behalf physically was hoping that we would look beyond the physical to the spiritual, that there's more going on, that God's more interested beyond just our physical issues with the spiritual ones. And he misses that here. This guy does. he misses that opportunity to see that there's more than just being healed from his problem. And so then the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, and there was a crowd in the place. And afterward, Jesus found him. Now, we're told in some other events where Jesus healed somebody that some turned back and praised him. Some came and found him. In this instance, it's worded in such a way that it's clear that the guy didn't go looking for Jesus. Jesus finds him. See, you are well, Jesus says. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. This is a very significant piece of information. We didn't know that the guy's issue was because of his sin. There are plenty of people Jesus heals whose physical problem is not because they were sinning. But this is a guy who's having problems because of sin in his life. And he says, so that nothing worse may happen to you. Hey, you need a course correction. You need some drastic change in your life. And the man went away and made sure that he didn't do worse things. And told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. The implication here is that he's more worried about his own skin and being in trouble than really what Jesus had pointed him to, the internal issues in his heart and his life. And so we're left with this kind of questionable view of this man. And so I wanted to just kind of sum it up this way. First, I wanted to do a profile. If we were to profile the man who's been sick, ill, or invalid for 38 years, how would we do that? Well, let's just do it this way. He's been sick for 38 years, so it's been a long-term problem, and since we know it's a sin problem, the sin must not have changed, right? There wasn't repentance or a change at a level that there needed to be. Secondly, he has no family or friends who are willing to help him. Isn't that interesting? If you're a person that's somewhat likable, you tend to have somebody around you who will help you if you're in desperate situations. But he's alienated and isolated himself enough that there's nobody to help him. That's a bummer. He seems self-focused or at least self-preserving, doesn't he? His actions are very much around his needs. Now, granted, we don't know more, but the way the narrative is told is emphasizing things a certain way. He hadn't bothered to find anything out about Jesus or his name. His sickness was caused by his own sin, and then he reports on Jesus to the authorities. All these add up when you look at it that way to say, we're not really sure about this guy. Maybe later he turned. Maybe later there was a change of heart and direction, but we have no confidence that this is a guy who had faith. This is a guy who responded the way that you would hope he would in this situation. Jesus uses this to show that he can work and to display his power to the leaders, but the man kind of is an example of a questionable response to Jesus. And so I would just say this, why I think this man is an example of unbelief or questionable belief is first the way the account's told, because some of the other accounts are told in a way to lead you, imply other things. The second is it emphasizes Jesus' action, not the man's actions. And then lastly, this whole section, everything that's going to follow is pointing to similar problems of unbelief. And so this is the first, and it's going to be a series of situations that help us to see problems people had with Jesus. So for those reasons, I think he's an example of someone who doesn't believe. In chapter 6, verse 66, we're going to see that many of the disciples who followed Jesus leave him. So there was initial belief, but it doesn't sustain as they learn more about Jesus. And then in chapter 7, verse 52, we're going to see this showdown where Nicodemus tries to stand up for Jesus, but most of the leaders of the town say, hey, there's no prophet that comes from Galilee. He doesn't fit our picture of what he should be. So the response is going to be often unbelief. And we begin to look at that in John. No matter how old you are, God always gives opportunities to change course. And one of the consistent things in the Bible is that God doesn't give up on people even like this guy. 38 years is a long time because he's probably 40 to 60, somewhere in there, in actual age. That's a long time for him to be in sin, struggling, and having a physical issue that's alienating him. And Jesus comes and gives him an opportunity, doesn't he? Isn't it good that God does that? And he doesn't just do it once. He often does it multiple times in our lives. There's no time. You don't time out on your opportunities to respond to the Lord. You don't get too old. He doesn't get weary to the point that he just scrubs you off his list. You're on the naughty list. God continues to give those chances to course correct. And I think we see that. We're reminded. We're supposed to look at the stories and put ourselves in the shoes of the people in the stories and consider. And so this guy could have responded differently. Hopefully he did later and moved forward in his faith. I think there's two angles on this. One angle is that for those who do believe, we can read it and just be reminded that we need the work that God does, not the work that we do. We depend on his work for us. That's such an important part. But then for those who maybe have partial belief or unbelief, it's a lesson that our God keeps reaching out. He keeps giving opportunities your whole life. There's always an opportunity for a course change, to move forward in faith, toward Jesus in faith. What's most needed is that internal change that only God can work. Last week, we were in India, in Chennai, and we were looking for a church to go to, and it's hard to find evangelical churches. And so we got a spot in our GPS, and we took an Uber to a neighborhood and wandered around with our GPS and couldn't find it. And that had happened the week before, too. We missed the service. And so we noticed somebody on the street that had a Bible, and they were walking. So we followed them, and we followed them into a garage, and then we followed them up a stairwell, and we went up a flight or two, and sure enough, there were like 150 people up there. And we went in, and we had an awesome service, just much like us joining here. And what was fun about that, well, there are a lot of things that were fun about that, but one of the funnest parts that stood out to us was towards the beginning of their service, one of the leaders of the church, a lay person, not a pastor, got up to do a prayer. And he began praying, and 15 minutes later he finished. And it was a sermon prayer, but he covered like every category and every part of life. Their witness to their bosses in their neighborhood, their families, their conduct at home, politics and their government, their camp, just step by step, just prayed a prayer of belief. There was a man whose course had been changed at one point in his life, and it just oozed out of that prayer. You could see his whole focus. He just rattled off. It wasn't like he was reading off a script. He was just praying through something. You could tell he had prayed many times. And it was impacting every part of his life and the world around us. It's possible to be changed. And our God sent his son Jesus, who reaches out and touches people, sometimes in really unique ways. But he came and he lived, and he ultimately went to a cross where he laid down his life on our behalf as our substitute so that our sin can really be forgiven. So that it's not held over our heads, so our shame isn't carried forever, so that we can have a new life in Jesus. And he rose from the grave so we can have confidence it's true. And he asked for us to trust in him and to allow him to course change our lives. And he doesn't want you to do that guessing or maybe or ifs. He wants you to be confident in his claims. But we're praying for you that no matter how old you are, you would draw nearer to him in faith. And for those of us who are trying, that we keep growing and changing in a new year. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your steady hand in our life. Thank you for the way you work, not just here, but all over the world, to change people, to change families and communities. God, sometimes your work is tucked back up a stairwell, kind of hidden. And we can get discouraged because we don't see what you're doing always. But God, when you give us those reminders, when you touch our own lives, God, help us to see more than just the external change of fortune or the problem that's been solved immediately, and be reminded that we can turn to you and draw near to you, that there's a deeper level of life, that spiritually you're making us new, that you want us to go and sin no more. Change us, God, and help us to be your people in a way that honors you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.